So, you're looking to interview some of the staff of your favorite anime, I see. Well, thankfully, you're subscribed to a seasoned and beautiful pro when it comes to the art of the inquiry. Having conducted a whole 2 interviews for the illustrious Crunchyroll itself, I'd say that I'm well equipped to tell you everything that you need to know about having a successful interview. Now, the initial step is going to, of course, be securing your interview in the first place. It won't matter how skilled you are if you don't actually have someone that'll field your questions. The easiest way to do this is to start an anime YouTube channel. All you have to do is get up around 10,000 subscribers and you can nab yourself a press pass to a lot of the anime cons out there, even larger ones like Anime Central. And then if you're around 20, maybe 25k, you can get into the king of American cons itself, AX. You might be asking right about now, wait, Pedantic Romantic, I thought you said this was the easiest way to get an interview. Growing a YouTube channel is really hard, right? Fear not, dear viewer, because I'm including a bonus primer on growing a YouTube channel in this video. All you have to do is upload multiple videos a week about the big buzz series of the moment. Attack on Titan, Hiroaka, Overlord, you get the idea. Make sure you put explained in all caps in your title. And crucially, make sure every one of your thumbnails has giant green text glowing radioactively. Feel free to also mix some reds and purples in occasionally to keep the formula fresh. Be aware of the fact that many cons have policies stating your outlet must have been established for a year or 2 already if you're applying, and get to work quick so that you can start securing those free con tickets. I mean those valuable journalistic opportunities. Interviewing con guests at their press panels is the easiest method because a translator will always be present, helping cross the language barrier that will pose a big challenge to you otherwise. However, there are a few other methods that can sometimes work. For example, maybe an indie animator follows you because they're a fan of your cute selfies, in which case you might be able to strike up a conversation one day and secure an interview. Not that you have done so, but, you know, you could. Or even if they don't follow you, you can always shoot your shot by just emailing a creator to request an interview. I'd like to bring in a special guest at this point in time for a brief interview on how best to do this. So, Zaria, I know that you recently managed to secure an interview with a yet-to-be-revealed anime director. Could you tell us a little bit about how you did that successfully?
Yeah, I just emailed him to ask for an interview, and he just said he'd do it.
Thank you so much to our guest Zaria for sharing this info. Now, as I said, the language barrier has to be accounted for, so you'd best have a friend who can speak Japanese and help draft your request for you. This is what makes international staff a good choice for interview if they fall within your subject matter, as if they speak English, and they often do, you can circumvent the language barrier in speaking to them. That YouTube channel I had you create and grow also comes in handy for these interviews, as it'd be pretty entitled to expect someone to give an interview to some rando on Twitter. If you've got that platform to offer them their voice and their work, then there's a reason for them to give that interview. I certainly don't think that without her body of researched work and 10,000 subscriber following, Zaria would have been able to secure that interview of hers. But alright, you've secured your interview, either by conducting it with a convention guest or by reaching out to ask for one yourself. Now you need to know how to make sure that interview goes well. The first thing to keep in mind is to have respect and tact. For example, after the Kase-san screening at AX, there was a Q&A panel with the director, and someone asked if, given the nature of this work, he was interested in doing other series exploring gay relationships in the future. After he said that what drew him to Kase-san was less that and more just how strong a romance it is, that he wanted to portray the relationship of these 2 characters, he was pushed with a follow-up question that made things pretty awkward. The asker there was just focusing in on something that there was nothing left to say about, trying to get an answer they liked better. There's a time and place for hard-nosed journalism. Press people on something they should be held accountable for if that's there, but, as I said, be tactful with it. The other big point is to do your research. Far too often do people in these kinds of Q&As ask questions about basic facets of anime production that are readily available information, or even worse, ask questions that are filled with misunderstandings of the way things work, and thus don't really even make sense to those giving the answers. In a Q&A session, these make sense as something that will inevitably happen. They're open to the public, and no one attending them is obligated to be an expert. What I'm saying here is that if you are going to be taking things to the interview table, you should make sure you're prepared enough to avoid making those mistakes. So make sure to do your research, and this means in a few regards. For one, to the best of your ability, just get a general grasp of the way the industry functions. If you'll be asking about production-related subjects, look into those specific aspects of production so that you can draw a deeper discussion on them out of your guest, instead of just having them state the basics. The other thing to research is other interviews that have been done with this person. I read through everything I could find in English for the 2 people I was interviewing, because my thoughts on it are that as much as possible I wanted to bring new information out of these sessions, to add to the available pool of knowledge. And obviously there's certain concessions and adjustments you'll have to make. Since these interviews were on behalf of Crunchyroll and for their audience, I did put forward some questions that were a tad redundant and more general, because most of its readers would not be reading those other interviews. However, I didn't get enough time to ask every question I'd had prepared, and when it came to the end, I tended to skip over my more generic, "So, how did you get started in the industry?" style questions to get the more specific and interesting stuff answered. And speaking of that, prepare your questions. I was pretty surprised when I went to the 2 press panels to find that other people hadn't really prepared questions. They might have had ideas, but it was 1 or 2 at most generally, and the exact phrasing was come up with in the moment as they asked the question. As a result, there were sometimes imprecise questions that had to be further clarified, or that just didn't get to the heart of things as well as they could have. I definitely suggest writing your questions down so that you can read them off when it comes time to conduct the interview, and have phrasing that serves you as well as possible. In something like the Game Grumps interview of Imaishi and Yoshinari, there's a lot of awkwardness born from the seeming lack of prepared questions. Aaron seems to be coming up with a lot of his questions on the spot, and so he'll sit there for like 15 seconds trying to work out phrasing. It just kind of feels disrespectful to your guest to make them wait for what will be a half-baked, somewhat confusing question. And hey, I don't want to go in on Aaron too much here. It was his first interview, he may not have had much time to prepare for the interview, I get it. He just serves as a good example of what a lack of preparedness can bring, because I do think that interview suffered because of these issues and ended up being pretty subpar. Now I'll give you some specifics on how to prepare good questions. Credit to both Canepa and Kevin, who I asked for advice on interviewing when I got the offer to conduct these, and who much of this advice comes from. The big one to keep in mind is keeping things shorter and sweeter as much as possible. Now, I did have some questions that were a bit chunky for my CR interviews, basically putting exposition of sorts that the guests would probably already know themselves into those questions. However, the purpose behind that was to have the info there as context for those reading the interview. If I was conducting it more personally for a project of my own, or even just to post it on my blog where I could provide that context in the post, I'd slim the questions down more. I may have failed to do so perfectly, but I tried to strike the best balance I could between servicing my readers and accommodating the interviewees. The purpose of keeping the questions short that you really want to focus on is allowing the guest to speak freely. If your question is too specific and guiding, you'll just sort of get the answer that naturally follows from your question. It often yields far more interesting results to make the question general, to ask about a broad topic and see what they've got to say about it. Generally, the person you're interviewing will know what interesting things they have to share better than you could guess at them having, so leave that up to them. For example, when I asked Kikuko Inoue about the talent agency she founded, I asked a simple, "How has that been?" and got one of the highlights of the interview. She went into how the name is Office Anemone because she founded it with her sister, and ane mo ne means with my sister, along with referring to a flower in Japan. It was such neat information to learn. And another thing I'll say is that putting all this work in is worth it because your guest will likely see that you care. When I asked Inoue about her daughter, she got so excited. The joy on her face was such a treat to experience, and I think that joy was present because she got to see someone legitimately invested in her daughter's career. As long as you're passionate about anime, as I think you will be if you're getting into interviewing, you'll end up getting really passionate about and endeared to these people upon looking into them. And to wrap things up here, as long as that passion is there and your work shows that fact, you should do pretty well for yourself. Your guest will recognize and appreciate it. The idea that I'm in a position where I've gotten to do this is insane to me, and I'm gonna do everything in my power to ensure that I get to keep doing it because there's nothing that I love more. So, if you'd like to help contribute to this goal of mine to continue being a part of this industry, your support on Patreon would be greatly appreciated. It is the unequivocal truth that without everyone's support here, I would have gotten to experience none of this. So a heartfelt thank you goes out to Psyker, MathWiz97, Jonathan Conley, Skylar Morrow, Tyler Monk, TeenShow37, Josh Grant, Lord Liquid Bacon III, Elaine Aldfelt, David McCown, Hijort Dog, Smokeweed Sephiroth 420, J-Man 4747, Jedi 168, Peach Plum, and everyone else supporting me on there already.